Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Portrait Podcaster. Cuba before 1959, the most advanced Latin American nation. Here are the stunning indicators that show just how developed Cuba already was. Consumer economy and lifestyle. More Cadillacs per capita in Havana than in any city except New York. More automobiles per capita than any country in Latin America, and more than Spain or Italy at the time. Cuba had the highest per capita ownership of televisions, radios, refrigerators, and telephones in Latin America. High-quality domestic appliance production from Cuban-owned factories. Media and culture. Over 100 daily newspapers and magazines, including prestigious publications like Bohemia. A vibrant and free press, with diverse political opinions and world-class journalists. Desilu Productions, owned by Cuban-American Desi Arnaz, was not only a cultural icon but a media production powerhouse, the first to invent the three-camera sitcom format. Cuba was home to international music, film, and literary circuits, with global stars regularly performing in Havana. Global business and Cuban capital. The Fangel Sugar Dynasty, originally Cuban, would likely have remained headquartered in Cuba and grown into a global agro-industrial and energy conglomerate, perhaps rivaling ADM or Cargill today. Other industries such as rum, Bacardi, cigars, Partagas, Upmann, banking, construction, and pharmaceuticals were already internationally respected and export-capable. Infrastructure and tourism. Havana's Hotel Nacional, Tropicana, and Riviera rivaled Las Vegas in elegance and attracted Hollywood elites. Latin America's first public electric railway, advanced road networks, and a subway system planned for Havana in the 1950s. Cuba had multiple airports, regular Pan Am flights, and was already a hub between North and South America. Speculative projection: Cuba without Castro. If none of this had been destroyed by Castro's communist regime, Cuba today would likely have Miami-Havana superregion. The proximity would have fused Havana and Miami into a binational economic and cultural axis, with financial, real estate, and shipping integration. Air travel between the two cities would be like Paris, London or Tokyo, Osaka. A regional tech, media, and cultural capital. With its early media strength and Desilu's success, Cuba could have become Latin America's Hollywood or Netflix-like hub. Cuba would likely have world-renowned studios, advertising agencies, and music labels, exporting Spanish-language content globally. A Caribbean Singapore. Low taxes, smart regulation, and aggressive reinvestment would make Cuba a Caribbean trade and logistics capital, a competitor to Panama and Miami. Port of Mariel or Havana would be a major transshipment hub, possibly on the scale of Rotterdam or Singapore. A billionaire diaspora reinvested. The Pollocks, Fangels, Bacardis, Gomez Mina, and other elite families, instead of being exiled, would have remained or returned as capital investors, restoring sugar, finance, retail, and tourism industries with global reach. The Cuban-American community would have invested massively, repatriating wealth and launching startups, factories, and universities. If Cuba had remained free and capitalist, and Amazon and Blue Origin had been founded there by a Cuban-descended Jeff Bezos, the consequences for Cuba and the world would have been transformative. Let's walk through the cascading impact across economic, technological, geopolitical, and cultural dimensions. Cuba becomes the tech and aerospace hub of Latin America. Havana becomes the Silicon Valley of the Caribbean, with world-class R&D centers, data infrastructure, and global e-commerce logistics. With Blue Origin launched from Cuban soil, Cuba joins the elite circle of spacefaring nations, hosting launch pads, satellite systems, and engineering universities. Investment surges in STEM education, with universities in Havana and Santiago producing aerospace engineers, coders, and physicists. The Cuban economy surpasses Chile and Portugal. GDP per capita could reach $40,000 to $50,000, rivaling modern-day South Korea or Singapore. Cuba becomes the wealthiest Spanish-speaking country in the world, overtaking Spain in key tech and innovation sectors. Widespread prosperity fuels a consumer revolution, with Cuban-designed smartphones, cars, and biotech exports. Reversal of emigration, brain gain. Instead of losing millions of professionals to Miami, Cuba attracts global Cuban talent back home. Highly skilled Cuban Americans, scientists, artists, and financiers return to Havana to build companies, start schools, and restore the republic. The island becomes a magnet for Latin American talent, positioning itself as a pan-Hispanic innovation beacon. U.S.-Cuba partnership becomes the model for hemispheric integration. A free-market Cuban success story makes Cuba the crown jewel of U.S.-Latin relations, reshaping hemispheric diplomacy. Joint U.S.-Cuban aerospace missions and trade deals make Havana a co-anchor of the Western Hemisphere's tech diplomacy, along with Washington, Austin, and Silicon Valley. A Havana Protocol for space development could emerge, guiding ethical and commercial uses of near-Earth orbit. The fall of communism accelerates. A thriving, free Cuba next door becomes a visible rebuke to socialist regimes in Venezuela, Nicaragua, and even China. The Cuban model replaces the Scandinavian myth on the left, showing that liberty, not socialism, produces equality and innovation. Cuba's success story inspires a Pan-American renaissance, economic liberalization in the region and a rise in democratic reformers. Global cultural power. Havana becomes a global capital of culture, architecture, and technology, blending colonial beauty with cutting-edge tech. Cuban tech firms launch film studios, streaming platforms, and virtual marketplaces that rival Netflix and Alibaba, in Spanish and English. Bezos' Cuban roots become a cultural touchstone, inspiring documentaries, media, and a new narrative, the island that changed the world, twice. A symbolic redemption of 20th-century history. A Cuba that leads in aerospace, biotech, and climate tech would mark one of the greatest historical reversals of fortune ever recorded. The tragedy of 1959 would be redeemed through triumph, proving that the Cuban people, long denied freedom, were always destined to lead.